to some dare call it conspiracy, with Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. In today's episode, we are joined by friend of the show, Mike Wendling, author of Day of Reckoning and national digital reporter for the BBC, to discuss the pervasive influence of disinformation and conspiracy theories on our political landscape. From the halls of the Republican National Convention to the far reaches of social media, we're about to dive deep into the complexities and contradictions of extremist groups and the individuals who shape public opinion. And of course, we'll be discussing the recent assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. Now, let's discover where the truth lies.
Hello, Mike. Thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, great to talk to you guys.
Brilliant. So, for people who don't know who you are, well, let people know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So my current job title is a national digital reporter for the BBC. I'm based in Chicago, right in the middle of the United States. In the past, I've been the editor of BBC Trending, which is a radio program and podcast who looks into social media and, of course, the wild world of disinformation. And I was around when the BBC disinformation team began in 2020. Now, is much bigger and called BBC Verify. So, I've kind of had a front row seat at the last decade or so of wild fringes and how those fringes have moved into the mainstream, really.
Isn't it crazy that we actually sort of, the scenario exists where a major sort of news corporation will go, look, okay, we just need an entire section set up to cope with disinformation and nonsense. Like, it's strange times we live in.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? A lot of criticism has sort of like come our way about like, you shouldn't all journalists be sort of, into debunking disinformation. But, it's not that we are out to sort of like go and find all the lies in the universe and completely sort of answer back to them. Really, this job of people who work in this space is to look at the stuff that's going really viral online. And we know that obviously there's this new vector called social media, where a lot of this stuff not only starts, but is spread quite wildly. It's like really important that we try to interrogate it no matter where it comes from. The other thing is it's been heavily politicized in recent years, but the assassination attempt that happened just a week ago from when we're talking now, it really shows that disinformation and conspiracy theory doesn't really, it's not like the preserve of the far right. That stuff has had attention and it's been particularly powerful in the last few years. But, we hear all these people who are Democrats or of the left or however you want to describe it, thinking that the assassination attempt on Donald Trump is staged. Crazy, no evidence for it. But, people immediately sort of went there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later, because I just want to stick with because there's so many things that we could talk about that, which I want to talk to you about. But I just wanted to sort of just stick with this disinformation thing. There's two aspects for it. Like, as you said, you would expect journalists to be involved in debunking and telling the truth anyway. So, however, we live in an age where news and the sort of lines between politics and entertainment and reporting on stuff in a manner that says, well, they said this crazy thing. We're not saying that it's true or not. We're just sort of putting this out there. The entire sort of landscape has changed to the point where there is so much speculation that news isn't that sort of pure. I mean, the argument is, has it ever been? But it is so sort of driven by the need for ratings and the need for sponsors and political ideologies to be fulfilled, that you do very well need just a disinformation team. The flip side of that, and I assume you get this criticism all the time, is, who says that the BBC are the arbiters of truth? Like, so how do you deal with both of those aspects?
Yeah, it's all about sort of good faith efforts, obviously. It's like, yeah, is the BBC correct 100% of the time? Am I correct as a journalist who works for the BBC 100% of the time? No, of course I've had stories where there's been, I've gotten things wrong, but, we issue corrections, we take complaints, and we try and work towards a version of the truth. The media environment that you're describing, and I must say it's particularly acute in the United States. And maybe we can talk a little bit about this too, the difference between particularly the US and the UK. I mean, other Western countries too, but the media environment and the sort of sway of the conspiratorial fringes, I suppose, is just completely eye-popping here. I mean, I knew this before I moved here. I took this job about 2 years ago now. And, I knew what I was getting into, but it surprised even me, as I've sort of gone around the country.
It's just ramped up.
Yeah, it's ramped up. I suppose I didn't sort of get a sense of, how pervasive it was at all levels, and so my book it really focuses a lot on the people who are getting worked up about these things and how they're sort of like flying under the radar, and they might be in like small towns in Iowa, for instance. I go into a story about a guy who was appointed to oversee elections. And it turns out that he was very deep into this idea that, elections are rigged and there's vast problems with the voting system in this town where nobody had actually sort of taken these things seriously for many years. It was surprising to me just how pervasive this kind of stuff was here.
Well, I suppose in America as well, we're starting to get this a little bit in the UK, but I feel that they're copying it because they realise that it gets views and sort of attention. But you've got prominent politicians, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, certain other people actively talking about these types of conspiracies and broader conspiracies, like either your sort of election fraud or immigration, even sort of leaning into your sort of Christian sort of nationalist type rhetoric. And you've even got, larger news corporations, Fox, Tucker, One American News Network, lesser New York Post and Newsweek. They all have got a particularly sort of sensationalist conspiratorial bent that has only increased, I think.
You mentioned two names there of speakers at the Republican convention this week, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson both spoke.
Oh, did they both? Oh.
They both spoke. I didn't catch Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was on pretty early, I think, on Monday or Tuesday. But Tucker Carlson spoke just a few hours before Donald Trump. And the way I sort of describe it, and I sort of set it out in the book, is that these people are actually very powerful, right? I mean, if you are speaking a couple of hours before the president, former president, potential future president, at the Republican convention, you are a very influential person. Even though you got canceled from Fox News, you know what I mean? Even though, you're sort of confined to this sort of channel on X. Marjorie Taylor Greene, another great example here, because as she has talked about this stuff, she continues to talk about this stuff. She doesn't get a huge amount of attention in the media, Fox News or otherwise, about the stuff that she talks about, vaccines. But it's completely conspiratorial, and it is almost indistinguishable from what somebody like Andrew Bridgen, the former member of parliament, says, right? Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene has been elevated. You know what I mean? She has pretty powerful positions in Congress in the Republican Party and clearly is very influential. She's been rewarded for this. You take Andrew Bridgen, and he's basically just been cast out by the Conservative Party, right? So, I think that's a pretty fundamental difference between the UK and the US and the way these kinds of things play. I mean, as you say, some of this stuff it's arguable about how much is bleeding into the mainstream and whatnot. But I think that that example is pretty sort of stark as to what I've experienced since kind of really, living here full time.
Well, yeah, so we've not quite gone over the precipice just yet in this country. But I think that's accurate. But there are concerted efforts from certain people, GB News, Reform UK, Tice, Farage, people like that. They are trying to embrace that presentation, the very, very, for want of a better word, American presentation. It's very, very big and brash and bang, bang, bang. Yeah, I think that they're certainly trying to get that here. But, hopefully they've not succeeded quite yet, although.
And to be fair, I think the rhetoric of these people aren't quite as popular over here as they are there. With an example of Andrew Bridgen.
Yeah.
Of course, he was Conservative MP, he got kicked out. We've just had an election and he only got 1,000 votes from his constituents while running as an independent. So it was not him that they would have voted for in the first place. It was the Conservative Party that I guess that area would have voted for. Would you think it'd be the same with Marjorie Taylor Greene? If she was running independent, she wouldn't have actually got her seat, as opposed to if she was running for the Republicans.
That's a kind of a really good way to phrase it. This isn't sort of astonishingly new. A lot of it is just kind of depends on Donald Trump, right? if she were to lose her seat, or if she were to sort of lose the Republican endorsement, for instance, it would depend on if the person that she was running against in her very Republican district were endorsed by Trump, and he were to sort of cast her aside. And Trump himself is very an interesting character. Some people, experts, conspiracy theory experts that I talked to say he basically came to power as the conspiracy candidate. How did he distinguish himself in 2015 and 2016? You had like 10 plus candidates. It's because that was his base from the point of time where he was saying, Barack Obama, show me your birth certificate. That was sort of his first foray into politics. But then, there's another sort of argument, to be fair about it, that says he's not really sort of that wedded to any particular thing. So another thing that we had this week was the leak of this phone call that he had with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't know if you guys saw this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess maybe if people haven't seen it, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s noted anti-vaxxer. Donald Trump called him. This was recorded by RFK Jr.'s son, and picks up a bunch of stuff that Donald Trump is saying, basically about that vaccines are causing autism or whatnot. And, this sort of like raised alarm bells. He has said stuff like this before, Trump has. But then obviously he has also been really he was a key driver of the research into the COVID vaccine. You know what I mean? And he sort of goes back and forth about vaccines. Hey, vaccines are great. Didn't we do a great job with the COVID vaccine? Oh, there's problems with vaccines. He's on a call to a guy who he wants his endorsement, and he wants him to drop out of the race to really just lock up these votes. He's riding high in the polls. Does he really believe that, or is he just saying things? It's hard to tell.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? It's like, it's difficult with all of these characters, your Marjorie Taylor Greens, your Andrew Bridgens, even you people like your Russell Brands and stuff like that. There's a discussion or an argument to be had about how much they believe and how much they just realize that this is marketable, and that basically there's always an audience that will give you money if you say certain things. And I think there's some people like your James Ellingpoles and stuff like that who started it off as a grift and became so entrenched in it that they started to believe it and get sucked into it, because when you're in that echo chamber, which you have to be in, you start to distrust other sources of information. And the whole conspiracy world has changed since probably about 2012, 2014, something like that. Because
between 2013 and 2015, 100%.
And this just so happens to be about the time that sort of certain political parties are looking into aspects of things like Cambridge Analytica and, manipulation of people, Gamergate's happening. It's very interesting to see where this all came from, and whether a lot of this was planned. Peter Thiel is somebody that is in all of these things. The Heritage Foundation, the Council for National Policy, think tanks like this connected to very, very powerful Christian organizations that are behind documents like the Mandate for Leadership and behind Project 2025. It's easy to get sucked into a conspiracy on that side of it.
It sounds like a conspiracy.
Doesn't
I was
it?
just gonna say.
Sounds like a grand right-wing conspiracy. But there's something to be said about a lot of it, really. But this is the argument. It's like, how much of it is organic? How much of it has been coerced? And how much of it is just people like this sort of stuff? Getting involved in the conspiracy world and thinking that you've got no responsibility, as you quite rightly, brilliantly put in your book about you don't need the responsibility of climate change. You don't need the responsibility of this. You're a good person because you're chasing pedophiles in underground caverns and stuff like that. It's like you can turn your entire life into a LARP. And that's surprisingly seductive at times, isn't it?
And the environment here in the US, I tell this to people, my friends back in the UK all the time. It just sort of fuels this stuff. If you go to, a convention like I was at this week, there is a secure zone, and, it's full of police officers from all states. They come in from all over the country, and everybody's a little bit on edge. Everybody's armed. There's just been an assassination attempt on the guy who's going to be speaking. There's another perimeter where there's, just Secret Service people just floating all around. It's like a heavily armed and militarized environment inside those gates, inside those iron gates. There's people who are meeting, and even more secluded rooms, you know what I mean, talking about the future of the country and making a plan to take power. It's like it lends the mind, especially if you're of a conspiratorial bent, to imagining these great plots. Very, very easy to see how people get sucked into this thing, regardless of your politics, regardless of what position you're coming from.
So tell us a bit about this, the Republican convention. What is it like? Is it like a Comic-Con, but terribly boring and just to do with fascism?
There are people who dress up.
Is there really?
Oh, yeah. Some of the delegates, they'll dress up as Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, and, people with elaborate dresses. Not everybody, most people are just in business suits.
Is there lots of shops selling merchandise and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
So it is like a Comic-Con, but for politics.
Yeah, and if you think about it, so, the sort of drama, it might be different for the Democrats. They have their own drama. But at this point, there's no sort of risk or peril, right? There's a little bit of sort of back and forth about who's going to speak and what kind of time slot they get, whether it's on prime time or TV. But everybody there has basically devoted time, the floor delegates, and maybe some of those sort of like the wider guests or whatever. The Republican Party officials, and, I talked to a whole load of them. And they come from small counties in Ohio or like small towns or whatever. And it's a big party for them. You know what I mean? And it's a chance for them to see the leaders of the party right up front. And, to talk to journalists. And, some of the party officials are there to meet and make connections and whatnot. And then, of course, you got a whole ton of journalists hanging around too. They're trying to get their own sort of angles and talk to people. Let me put it like this. I went there and I expected to sort of remain outside the zone, right? Because I thought that's where the action was going to be. I was not at the Republican convention obviously 2020 was a bit weird. 2016, when Donald Trump was on the rise and just getting nominated for the first time. I was reading reports from where it was in Cleveland, Ohio. And there was, Alex Jones was hanging out and Roger Stone was hanging out and all these alt-right people were having meetings. And I kind of thought, rather naively, I suppose, that was going to happen this time around, that there might be sort of, random factions at Groypers or whatever, just, at hotels.
Was Nick Fuentes not there or anybody like that? Or not that you know?
Not that I know. There are a couple of things, like the protests were pretty muted from the left-wing protesters, mostly left-wing protesters. But there wasn't that sort of sideshow. And part of the reason why there wasn't that sideshow is because a lot of those people were inside. Inside the gates, there were the Tucker Carlsons and the Marjorie Taylor Greens, right? Also inside, a colleague of mine ran into Laura Loomer. I spoke to Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk runs a group called Turning Point, and they invite Alex Jones onto the stage. I don't think Alex Jones was around at all. I even saw people like Vince Fusca, this QAnon.
That is RFK Jr.
JFK Jr.
Yeah, JFK Jr.
JFK Jr.
But like, I don't know what he was doing there. I tried to sort of talk to him and he kind of scuttled away, but these people are in the gates.
He must be honestly, he must get so much attention. He's a celebrity.
Very weird.
I know I'm jumping ahead here because we're going to have to talk about the assassination attempt later, but Vincent Fusca's right there in the background.
Yes.
Yeah, as Trump's taking the shot.
Yeah.
And everyone's ducking, and Vincent Fusca is not ducking at all. He's just stood there like nothing. And I thought, well, that to me proves that he's definitely not JFK Jr. With his father and his uncle having met the fate that they did, I'm pretty sure he'd be pretty traumatized by gunshots, and he would be the first person on the deck,
Brilliant.
I went up to him. I just noticed him sort of like taking selfies with the fans. I mean, as you say,
he's like, I told you.
So then I tried to ask him about a few questions. I mean, he basically told me, I don't really want to talk about that day. I'm still thinking about it. He sort of did not hear some of the other questions that I was posing. I didn't really know what to ask him. I don't know a whole lot about what he actually sort of does at the moment. So I was struggling a little bit, but I was, whatever I was saying, he was like not hearing or pretending not to hear. I don't know.
Or was he treating you like that because you were there for the BBC?
Potentially.
How were you treated, when you said that you worked for the BBC?
That's a good question. This isn't the first time that I've been to Republican gatherings or Donald Trump rallies. And generally, people are very polite. You know what I mean? Sometimes people, might grumble about, oh, you're one of those or whatever. It's not super politicized in the way that it might be in other countries. I always say it's kind of an advantage coming from, number one, from the foreign press, and the BBC is pretty well respected internationally. So I don't necessarily get a whole lot of trouble in terms of people not talking to me or, being aggressive. Sometimes they're a little bit cagey, but generally I find that actually it's an advantage. I always say, like, I also talk to sort of, Antifa people and stuff like that. If I was from Fox News, they wouldn't talk to me. Some of these, fringe right-wing people wouldn't talk to me if I was from like CNN or the New York Times. So it's sort of like a good cover to have, really.
Because you did speak with Stu Peters, and he obviously has some problems with the BBC.
Yeah, absolutely. That was interesting. But not so much. Like, I've been sort of negotiating that for a while, and they clearly wanted to do that. You know what I mean? As I describe in the book, it was sort of very cordial at the start, and he was very sort of, oh, hey, how you doing? The minute the cameras go on, boom, he's in attack mode. He's saying that, you guys should be convicted for war crimes. And I've never actually had somebody I've interviewed say, like, you should be executed. That was really quite weird, if I'm honest. But then he was also sort of like doing it as a show. And I a couple of months later, I sort of like lost contact a little bit after we put the story out. But I did notice that he kept sort of recycling the clips, you know what I mean? And being like, hey, this is the mainstream media punching bag that I'm going to use. And it just happened to be me. So every so often people are like, send me a message that like, oh, is that you that Stu Peters is ranting about? It's like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Guilty.
Stu Peters has taken on a tactic that, interestingly, is the same thing that Trump does, and like a lot of people, but Boris Johnson tried to try it as well. This adoption of like, if you have no shame, there's no way people can attack you, and it's tragic, isn't it? Really, that like people have got to that sort of stage. It's almost like a satire, isn't it? The people, that is what is important. Attention. Doesn't matter if it's good. Doesn't matter if it's bad. Often that attention could be monetized, but really it's the attention, isn't it, that they want, or the sort of like parasocial relationships. There's something deeply, deeply missing from these people that they have to do these things.
Yeah. And I mean, in the social media age, you just have to keep ramping it up. And that gets pretty dicey. You know what I mean? You start
pretty quickly. So, yeah.
Pretty quickly. Yeah. So, if you're Stu Peters, you start with like, just asking questions or whatever. And soon you're blaming the Jews for, everything bad. It's extremely radical,
Yeah.
And it just ends up in a very, very dark place.
Well, Stu Peters, speaking of failed rappers, Kid Rock was at the convention, and Hulk Hogan, who was
Hulk Hogan, yeah.
Hulk Hogan got that call from Peter Thiel and went, remember that Gawker thing? Get over there and start ripping T-shirts. Otherwise, we're releasing all this audio footage of you being racist, which has come out anyway.
I was sort of, putting up a bulletin board with red string on it. I was like, guys, JD Vance. Here's the hidden, lines between JD Vance and Peter Thiel, who
and Vivek Ramaswamy
Vance used to work for, and Vivek. It all makes sense. Vivek, I could go on and on about Vivek. Not my first encounter with him, but
just to intercut there, just so people know, all of those people are heavily invested in Rumble, and Rumble is one of the outlets that is favored by the conspiracy crowd because you can be a Nazi on there. So, it's another one of these sort of nodes, isn't it, of like normalizing certain things and politicizing other demographics, basically. It's almost like an extension of the sort of Pizzagate type thing, basically, where Pizzagate and QAnon, we've said this numerous times, it's interesting because of the Hulk Hogan thing. It's politics for people like wrestling. And by which I mean, it's like, you don't understand politics, you don't know what any of this means. All you know is that basically Donald Trump is a hero that's fighting pedophiles and you want to be on his side. And that's it. And that's what the whole point of these conspiracy sort of things are. is to politicize people. Or that's a theory anyway.
I mean, listen, I think it's even a little bit more than a theory. I think it goes back to this idea that you raised before about how deeply people believe this, right? So in Pizzagate, you know, the alt-right people who are spreading Pizzagate, a guy like Jack Posobiec, the people who sort of were around sort of like Milo Yiannopoulos in the alt-right circles and whatnot. You know, when I was reporting on Pizzagate in 2016, as it was sort of going off, I was trying to like talk to these people, and they were not really taking it seriously. But they realized his political power. You know what I mean? It realized that it was whipping people up, so they were jumping on it like crazy. You know, does Jack Posobiec really think that there was children underneath Comet Ping Pong? I highly doubt it. I highly doubt he ever thought that. But he knew that it was good content and that people were responding. And you know, again, it goes back to sort of like the sort of environment in this country and about how many people were responding, right? It's like more than a niche. It was something that he could capitalize and sort of build this kind of, you know, media empire. And a lot of these people who would jump on these things have actually found themselves to be, you know, it worked, right? And if it works, you might as well do it again, which makes, you know, events and conspiracy theories that much more frightening.
Yeah, and a lot of them have not really faced any consequences, like not in the same way that, say, Alex Jones was for Sandy Hook and stuff like that. But although recently, Dinesh D'Souza, didn't he? He's in a lot of trouble regarding 2,000 Mules. Didn't he have to admit that it was all fake and stuff like that, and he's going to get sued to within an inch of his life or whatever?
I don't know if it went that far where he admitted it was all fake.
I think he did. I'm sure. Yeah, I think he did. He said that there was no evidence to support anything in the film. And the producers of the film put something on the website as well, disavowing it. It was a total sort of like obliteration of it.
Yeah, I saw that they had sort of pulled it from distribution. I sort of missed the part where he sort of disavowed it, which is astonishing because that has become, you know, chapter and verse. A lot of the time when, you know, you're at a gathering of Republicans or a Trump rally, it's like they don't even have to explain the theories. It's just sort of common knowledge. You know, Trump doesn't go on stage and say, you know what, there was 2,000 mules and blah, 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 and give the details that were in that film. Everybody knows, and everybody just sort of takes it, you know? He uses this in a number of different issues. So, for instance, I'm sitting here in Chicago, and for him, that's like a shorthand for crime. Now, obviously, there's quite a lot of crime in Chicago, but it's kind of gone down in the last couple of years. It's still a serious problem. Don't want to minimize it. But he doesn't even go into any of this stuff. All he says is, in Chicago, and then everybody's like, boo, yeah. Same thing with the conspiratorial stuff. You know, it's so baked in that it doesn't even need to be explained.
Well, in fact, in many ways, it's better that it is baked in and it doesn't need to be explained, because then you're already whipped along with it. If Donald Trump started explaining the theories, say, from 2,000 Mules, a lot of people will go, hang on, that doesn't make any sense. So how would they got in touch with these women when? When did they get these women and go, hi, it's the government here, yeah. In a few months, we're going to have to like involve you in a massive fraud. Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. No, that's fine. Is that all right? You couldn't do this. Like, it doesn't make any sense when you look at it, like, actually sensibly. It's interesting you mentioned Chicago. Does Chicago mean what I think it means, which is what CRT used to mean, which is what DEI now means, which is essentially, it's the N-word. That's what it means. When they're saying crime and stuff like that, they mean there's black people living there.
I mean, yes. And when you look at like the murder rate in Chicago, who gets murdered, who's doing the murdering, and where it happens, it's definitely like, not entirely, but like, disproportionately an African-American.
No, but there's a lot of poverty and stuff like that. Like, what I'm saying is that these things are now shorthand for their dog whistles. And these dog whistles are becoming absorbed into the lexicon of both the conspiratorial group and this Trump political group as well.
And obviously, like, using the dog whistle is like you're able to be a little bit more ambiguous with it. Like, it can capture different people's version of what Chicago means, or different versions of whatever conspiracy he's kind of referencing. like however deep someone actually is into it, like everyone's going to see it and just go, oh, he's talking about the thing that I am interested in, even though he might not be.
Yeah. Well, he's got plausible deniability. I didn't say
Exactly.
black people. I said Chicago. But a lot of people in that audience will understand what that means or what that infers.
Yeah. I mean, you can spin it. You can also easily say, I mean, there was a pastor from the South Side of Chicago, majority African-American sort of neighborhood, who spoke at the Republican convention. You know what I mean? I think he gave the blessing. I can't remember if it was Wednesday night or Thursday night, but anyway, it's sort of when that sort of person hears that, they're identifying because they're like, oh yeah, I see the effects of crime right on my doorstep. So, but then the person who is from the white community that's, hundreds of miles away in Iowa or whatever might hear that and say, hey, yes, it's because of the black people in Chicago and that's what Trump is against. So that you can appeal to sort of all these different communities. And, I have to say, particularly when it comes to conspiracy stuff or like disinformation, it's kind of a real struggle for mainstream journalists or, particularly like fact checkers. And I don't want to sort of like slam on fact checkers, but there is sort of a limitation when it comes to this kind of stuff of the usefulness of fact checking, because if somebody doesn't make a definitive statement, there were 2,000 mules who were stuffing ballot boxes. If they're just sort of saying they're cheating, it's all rigged, you can't check that. You cannot, fact check that in the same way that you can a declarative statement. So it's a very sort of perhaps clever, perhaps deliberate, perhaps not, but effective strategy to be very general about these things.
Absolutely, totally. Why does Donald Trump keep bringing up Hannibal Lecter?
I have no idea.
No, I don't know, nor have I.
It was suggested to me that it's some sort of allusion to Haitian immigrants and like he's calling them cannibals. And I didn't hear that in the speech on Thursday night. I didn't hear any sort of, there was obviously a lot of inflammatory rhetoric around immigrants in general, but like I didn't hear a specific like reference to Haitians. I guess here again, maybe we have a something that is designed to sort of push somebody's buttons. I'd have to sort of go back at his speeches and see if there isn't any link there, but it's very weird. The whole speech that was ad-libbed.
Yeah.
And
nobody's written it. This Hannibal Lecter line, what do you think about that? That's brilliant. Yeah. It's very good.
No, nobody wrote that in. This is going to probably fuel more conspiracies, but hours before these big speeches, the press and the assembled dignitaries get advance copies, right? I don't think this is a big secret. And we get sort of little details and spin that the campaign is producing. Hey, and the spin actually on Thursday was like, you know what, Donald Trump's going to be, to the point. He's going to talk very personally from the heart. It's going to be about an hour, blah, 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 blah. And then we were sitting there and suddenly he just starts ad-libbing. And as he goes into the speech, he starts ad-libbing more and more and more. And it's starting to like not resemble anything that's on the advanced copy that we had. I was sort of behind him, so I had this view of the teleprompter, and the teleprompter at points was just like stuck for minutes. You know what I mean? As he just sort of goes off into these digressions. So like whatever plan they had, he didn't stick, this is, again, no news flash here. He doesn't really like to stick to the script, But that Hannibal Lecter thing came in an ad lib, and then, he wasn't going to say Joe Biden's name. That was not in the prepared advanced remarks, but in one of these digressions, he said, he accused Biden of being the worst president, and he actually said his name. And then he said, I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to say his name once. And then, he goes off into all these other sort of attacks when we've been promised a speech that's going to sort of, stay away from that kind of stuff and have this sort of unity theme. He just can't help himself.
No, that may be one of the sort of, but it might actually be quite useful, really, because that is the thing, isn't it? It's astonishing to me that people have that he is as popular as he is, because it was only 4 years ago. Like, do people not remember how dreadful he was at everything, and like how much time he spent on the golf course? Like, but apparently no, because he got shot, everyone's like, oh, perhaps we should make him president. Like, which doesn't make any sense to me. Right, okay. Like, you know, it doesn't. Like, why? How does that work? Like, terrible criminal, awful person. If I... Is it going to be loads of people going to be like, oh, now make him mayor of something? Like, no. So, you know, why are we holding different standards to different...
You know, I don't... let me remain, obviously, like, you know, he has his legal issues. Let's put it like that. To be completely neutral about it. And, you know, look, I spend a lot of time talking to Donald Trump supporters, you know, and people who talk to, you know, people who are sort of like involved in the Republican Party. And obviously I got a big fat dose of this week, you know, one might call it an overdose. There are specific issues and controversies that have overwhelmed like the news agenda. And it's not just the news agenda, I suppose. When you think about like immigration, you know, there's just been a lot of people entering the country and it's very visible in some places. Inflation is just, you know, a big thing. The economy is a big thing. Inflation is like chilling out a little bit here, but that still means that the prices are high. And these are sort of real things that people sort of look at. And yeah, like they memories are short, and maybe in the social media age, memories are even shorter. When I look at the sort of far right and a lot of the people who I talk about in the book, they really sort of thrived in the chaos that happened under Donald Trump. You know what I mean? You don't have a Charlottesville, for instance, if you don't have some sort of like oxygen in the political space to sort of, you know, assemble your Unite the Right rally and whatnot. I guess a lot of that stuff has been forgotten in the past few years, and other issues which the Republicans are playing on and trying to capitalize on have become sort of like more on the minds of voters. The other thing I would say is like Donald Trump is still deeply unpopular. It's easy to get swept away. You're in the room. Everybody in the room is for Donald Trump, is very united behind him. More Americans dislike him than like him.
From our perspective, all that we keep seeing on the news and such like that is there seems to be a lot of stuff like just focusing on like Biden not being suitable. And it seems rather weighted. Like, I mean, yeah, he's had a couple of absolute nightmares and stuff like that. But when I actually went and watched the debate that he had against Trump, it wasn't nearly as terrible as the media had portrayed it to be, or certain sort of nodes of the media have portrayed it to be. And it's like, seems a bit strange to me. Like, what's your take on that?
I think probably everybody can watch it for themselves. You know what I mean? Joe Biden, if you look at previous debates, he's just a lot more sort of lucid and together. And he was not able to parry a lot of the, frankly, wrong information that Donald Trump was talking about. Donald Trump is a kind of a known quantity, and you know what he's going to say, and you kind of know that he's going to exaggerate. And there is ways of politically parrying that in a debate. Joe Biden just didn't do any of that. You know, besides all the sort of, you know, stuff about his age and him just sort of not looking very sort of good or you know, I don't know, I wouldn't really want to get into like, you know, whether it was exaggerated or not, or, you know, whether people should be also asking questions, which, you know, of course they should or could, about Donald Trump and his age and whatnot and his sort of temperament. Obviously, all that stuff is relevant. I did go a week before the convention. I did go see a Biden rally in Wisconsin, and he doesn't speak for as long, and he is maybe not the most fluent.
Previously, do you mean, or not as long as?
Yeah, he doesn't seem to not as long as Trump, but nobody speaks as long as Trump. Like, Trump just gave the longest speech ever.
The stark difference between me and Neil.
This stamina is definitely like you can tell he's definitely aging. And I went back and I looked at debates when he was running for vice president in 2008, and there was a difference. I don't think you can really deny it. But, you know, there's also an argument about, so he's maybe losing a step or two. You know, is he still able to make the decisions? And that is, you know, the subject of endless talk on the US media these days.
I got a comment for you, Neil, to your question.
Mm-hmm.
Before social media, discourse was led by what was being spoken about from the news or what was being reported on. And today it feels like the news
is reflecting the attitude on social media.
Yeah, exactly. They're listening to the discourse. So like, oh, well, people want these stories, so we'll talk about this thing. So on social media, a lot of the discourse has been more about how we should get rid of Biden or something. And so more...
So give them what they want. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that the media landscape has changed, the prevalence of social media means that basically, and also the fact that basic news is expected to be 24 hours and sort of constantly responding and also sort of fighting for ratings and stuff like that. Do you think that there's the fact that it has gone from a sort of purely, we're telling you what the news is, to a more sort of opinions-based thing reflecting the mood of social media? Do you think that that potentially gives more sort of like scope for disinformation?
I think it's probably a good way to put it, and I don't think that's like hardly controversial at all, really.
No, I could say something else.
Yeah. Let me put it like this. So in around 2013, 2014 is when this unit that I, worked with and then like eventually was the editor of BBC Trending started. And we were sort of accused at the time of sort of trying to like copy BuzzFeed or whatever, you know what I mean? There was a lot of skepticism in the newsroom, and not just the BBC, it's like in mainstream media newsrooms about like whether social media was a flash in the pan. You know what I mean? I don't think like that debate is happening anymore. It's not something you hear. But you saw a lot of this, our attempt was basically to, number one, like find some like news stories and sort of do some like real investigation and stuff. And to not just do what was very popular at the time, which was sort of like, hey, this is a proxy, and particularly Twitter, because of the open nature of Twitter compared to some other platforms. You know what I mean? It's a really bad shadow of public opinion, right? And they just like sort of like whack up some tweets. I'm not like sort of criticizing BuzzFeed specifically. Loads of news outlets did similar things, which is just like, hey, here's like 15 tweets. This is what people think about this issue. You know what I mean? And we always tried not to do that. I mean, as much as we could, and sort of like, we always had this sort of criteria as like, can we actually add something by talking to real people or like really finding out how this is being reflected or influencing actual stuff somewhere in the world? And it's surprising to me that sometimes you still see that kind of stuff today. You know what I mean? You still kind of see, hey, this is what people online think of issue X. Like, to me, that's just like not a very good way to do journalism. It's cheap and it's, you can produce a lot of it.
Well, isn't that the reason they're doing it though? Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then we can get into, I mean, it's kind of boring, but like, the whole sort of like thing about industry and economics and search and big tech and all this other stuff. You know what I mean?
We're going to talk about that tomorrow at the docks, but well, it is an interesting one then. So, in America particularly, what has the coverage of the assassination attempt been like? And by which I mean, what has the tone been like? Because I think it's fair to say that the tone on the internet, in social media circles, was hysterical and rabid. On all sides, immediately everybody went, like, there was a huge amount of people, oh, this is a bit convenient, isn't it? Yesterday we were talking about Project 2025, and now all of a sudden he's like a martyr or whatever. And then there's other people basically who are doing the sort of, well, I've been analysing the sound and there's at least 3 gunshots going off. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the sniper and the 2 guys from the Secret Service and the attempted assassin.
Yeah.
And there's been all sorts, hasn't there? Like fake squibs and stuff like that. But then,
oh yeah,
at the other end of the spectrum, people were like, it was God. God did this. And it's like, what the hell did God have against that poor fireman?
Yeah. Or John F. Kennedy. I mean,
yeah. Or the children of Sandy Hook. Like, if we want to go that far, like, know, it is a bit ludicrous.
You heard that directly from the stage. I mean, like Tucker Carlson said that, right? And he's not the only one. Like Donald Trump used the word providential, right? Like yeah, I was saved by God. Like that was just, that was another one of these things that was just sort of like a common assumption that God somehow saved Trump's life. Looking at sort of security, and I know that like we're going to learn more about like what the Secret Service was doing, but just like if you go to these things, you just know how tight security is. He had a, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100,000 chance of doing what he did, getting to that vantage point undetected. You know what I mean? Lining up, not being seen. Donald Trump taking the stage when apparently like they knew somebody was in the crowd and somehow the message didn't get through or, whatever. And Donald Trump's still taking the stage. Donald Trump's always late to events. So why don't you just tell him, hey, just wait 20 more minutes, dude, while we find this guy. And on the other side is just like, he turns his head at the last minute. He should be dead. It was just like a fraction of an inch. So then, of course, that's the proof, all the proof you need that, there was some sort of divine intervention. I always feel like this conspiracy stuff really takes off in these sort of like marginal situations. So on January the 6th, right, there wasn't like a whole load of people who died on the day. I know that there was, Ashley Babbitt was shot dead and police officers were, battered and eventually were sort of died later. But, the government didn't topple and they didn't find Mike Pence and like the crowd was chanting, hang him. If something that dramatic had happened, you might see some sort of like snapping back to reality. You know what I mean? If Trump had been shot, obviously there was not going to be all these things about how it was all staged, right? And then I have to say, you won't hear them on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. You know what I mean? You'll hear maybe sort of allusions or people asking questions and stuff like this, but it's generally pretty straightforward, trying to get any sort of scrap of information. I mean, the worst is trying to fill airtime in this, because I have heard pundits on all cable channels, sort of saying, well, hey, we saw that he was searching for depression or online. It must mean something. And it might not mean something. It might not mean something. He was searching for, there was one particular search where I thought you are reading way too much into this, Mr. ex-FBI expert, something that was in the news or some mass killer that was in the news. Well, okay, if that's the criteria, look at my internet searches, right? Like, if that's the criteria, I am about to go postal, right?
My search would definitely get me locked up, because I've been looking at these people all for the last like week or so. I've been looking up everything I can about assassins, serial killers, mass shooters, terrorists, all that kind of stuff. And like, what are their motives? What did they do?
You're on the watch list.
And like, I don't think I'd want anyone to look at my search.
There is a real issue like with the fact that we don't really have a whole lot of information. I think the authorities are going to be particularly cagey in releasing this stuff. Already there's been, reports that have been sort of denied about like statements that he's made on Discord and stuff like this. And so they're just going to be very, very controlled about it, I think. And that is if we actually find any useful information whatsoever, because, there have been shootings where like there hasn't been a whole lot of information. We haven't found a motive. The Las Vegas, the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. We don't know why the guy did it, and we will never know, probably.
No, quite.
No, we get that a lot with a lot of things, as I've come to learn. Like, but I just want to go back to like, because we're talking about this, and I want to sometimes know how things work in the background. So, regards to his internet searches or whatever, and the media will report on this. How does this work? Like, does the FBI like say, oh, to the journalist, here's the list, go download it? Or like, what goes on? Would you have access to these things?
In short, no. And the long answer is an FBI source will tell the journalists, right? And being foreign news in this country, we're sort of down the pecking order. Our news partner is CBS, and a lot of times we get this information through CBS reports. We have our own reporters and our own sources, of course, but that's often how it works in this sort of breaking situation. that will be usually delivered verbally, or maybe sometimes by like an email or whatever, but like by a FBI source who like sometimes is named, sometimes is not. There was members of Congress were briefed by the FBI on some of this stuff a couple of days ago. And so like that's another sort of source where like the members of Congress will be talking to journalists, and sometimes they'll be named and sometimes they won't be named. But we certainly won't have any sort of like raw data. They won't sort of share documents or anything like this generally. I mean, I don't, cases differ, but it's usually you're sort of being told verbally by some investigators.
And obviously certain stuff they can't really tell you because they're maybe building
it's an ongoing investigation, yeah.
Right,
yeah. It could jeopardize it, surely.
It's an ongoing investigation, and, there are obviously, family members that are alive, and, perhaps people, if you go back to, for instance, the young naval reservist who was sharing classified documents. I don't know if you remember that case pretty recently.
Yeah.
So there was a Discord server involved anyway, so there was like other people involved who were, who were starting to talk to journalists or whatnot. You know what I mean? And in that case, the raw information can be seen, like not by me personally. In that case, I think it was like other news outlets. Maybe it was the Washington Post or whatever that was sort of like, sending some of this information around. So that's it. But like, like getting firsthand material if it's not being made public. And of course, by now we know that like, there wasn't a manifesto, so-called manifesto, there wasn't a document lying out in that we've had in some other cases that, the reasoning behind it or the motive.
It's a strange sort of situation, isn't it? Because like, I think it's been sort of hyper extenuated or hyper focused because of the timing and stuff like that. But this is why conspiracy theories form, because there's a gap in information. The thing with this is that basically also people realize that I can use this to benefit me in either a political way or, a worldview ideological way or whatever. It's one of those horrible things, like, as well, like, it's like with COVID or something like that. It's so random. It's like, bloody hell, one of the most powerful men on the planet nearly died. And if that can happen to him, dear crikey, look at my own mortality and fragility and stuff like that. And people don't want to sort of, these things, I think as well, whether it's like a sort of a mild form of PTSD or whatever, do you know what I mean? People are sort of like, they need to the answers immediately, and they need to be able to close loops off and stuff like that. And it's a strange old time, isn't it?
Because this is like, I was quite surprised at the text that you sent me. Like, this is the first time that you were able to kind of stop yourself from like kind of going into filling those gaps. And you were like, hold on, I just need to wait until I get everything.
Like in your own brain or like on Twitter?
Yes. No, but both. Like, both. I mean, like, obviously, like, my temptation was, there's so many foul jokes that I can come up with this. Luckily, my brain avoided that one as well. But in regards to normally whenever there's a situation, I in the past wanted to go, all right, well, let's get a working hypothesis, and it could be this or it could be that and it could be that. And this time, for whatever reason, my brain went, don't know. We'll find out at some point. Or we won't.
Yeah.
And I was quite pleased with myself that I didn't sort of get all hysterical and start arguing about, well, it's definitely this or it's definitely not that. And I managed to sort of just remove myself from Twitter for a few days and just go, I don't care. Like, no, we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
So there's no point arguing about it, which is bizarre as hell, because I really like it arguing.
When we sort of hear about names, like again, every case is different, but like, we start sort of searching, and me and my colleagues starts, a Saturday night, we're like looking around for any sort of scrap of information, looking at all the sort of conspiracy theories and thinking, hey, you know what, where are these coming from? But, then you can sort of start to build a picture if you see the social media accounts. And again, like you say, like there wasn't loads that were out there that we know of, you know what I mean? Like he didn't have like a huge social media profile. And generally, this is going to sound maybe a little bit strange to like you guys in your audience, but like often it's a matter of interpreting those documents. It's like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
in the mainstream media, like, my editors who aren't sort of like in this world all the time because, they're sort of normal people. That's
What you
meant as a
saying,
compliment.
Mike?
It's meant as a compliment to my bosses. You know what I mean? Like, they're not freaks like us. But you just like I recall when the mass shooting happened in Buffalo, the sort of racist mass shooting, and the document was really sort of straightforwardly came up pretty damn quick. I was just going through it and sort of talking to my editors and explaining what the material in there was, and like the stuff that you had to sort of watch out for because it was pranks and this sort of internet in language or whatever it was. You know what I mean? So there's like just a basic interpretation job. But obviously in this case was completely different because we just don't have those kinds of things. And that's where the misinformation runs in. That's where the conspiracy theory fills the vacuum.
Yeah, certainly.
Well, I was there for like 3 or 4 days. I just felt like I had to do something to help close those loops. I had to do something to fill those gaps. Because like I just had this real like flashback to what I was doing on 7/7 in the morning, like doing like the opposite, like spreading conspiracies, doing something really bad. And I felt like I owed it to my old self to like be that person to try and help fill those gaps. So if my old self was looking at it today, I would have those gaps filled, so I was just kind of going at it. And to be honest, man, it like exhausted the hell out of me because it's not my job.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm doing it like 24/7, essentially. It's like I will do it every free spare moment that I had.
Well, what you did was brilliant as well. Like, I think one of the sort of, I don't know if disheartening is the right word, but like, there's a certain swathe of the people that you're talking with that don't want to be persuaded. They know. Like,
yeah.
do you know what I mean? In inverted commas.
And surprising to me, it was like actually most of them were on the left this time.
Yeah.
I was fully expecting, right, to wake up Sunday morning after it happened and thinking, right, I'm going to have to start going on to all these deep state accounts and kind of trying to like, I don't know, help set some things straight. But my timeline was just full of left wing. It's a hoax. It's staged. None of this thing is real, essentially. And I was taken aback by that. And to be honest, like I would be 100% honest here, I was way more angrier than I ever am with like the normal people that I'm usually arguing with, which could be from center to far right, like that side of people. And I was just like really pissed. I was mad. So I just kept going and going and going because I was like, have you guys not been listening to us for like the last 3 years trying to explain this stuff? And you're caught in the gap trap.
Yeah.
That we've been talking about like the whole time.
It's a stress response as well. Like, something horrible's happened. I need to find answers. I know this isn't the thing. I need to find answers so that doesn't happen to me, is what your subconscious is going. So, people need to fill the gaps and stuff, as you say. But hey, it just shows that nobody's immune to this, and that the environment and the incident and the medium, so to speak, it really, really plays into that. It snowballs it and like exacerbates it to ridiculous degrees, basically.
When I first started to get really interested in this stuff, it was like in high school, college and stuff. And like, in the 1990s, living in the Midwest, I went to University of Ohio, and I was hanging out with a bunch of sort of really kind of left-wing anarchist Antifa types, people who were like members of the Anti-Racist Action, which is basically the original sort of American Antifa group. And they were into conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it sort of goes back to that kind of thing where like conspiracy theories are particularly attracted to people who are on the bottom of the pile. They were very, very fringe. Even in our sort of like college environment, they didn't really have any sort of political sway. It was fascinating. It was great to sort of like hang out with these guys and like talk with them. I always sort of looked at it more sort of like a sociological enterprise, or, you know what I mean? Wow, isn't that interesting? Like, rather than sort of believing in this stuff, I think there's a lot of people who just I saw one tweet that was something like, I don't believe in any of these conspiracy theories, but damn, I want to hear about them.
Hell yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because, they're fascinating. And like, this is the attraction to conspiracy theories, right? Or it certainly used to be. They're fun. They're a lot of fun, right?
They used to be, yeah.
You wouldn't invest so much time to it if it wasn't fun and interesting. But, I think that has changed a lot since COVID and slightly before that. I think it's become more politicized, more manipulated. I'll give you an example, right? Like, someone was moaning about UBI and stuff. So I think it was Matt Letizia was moaning about UBI and basically saying, you don't understand. There's this conspiracy, right? Okay. UBI and socialism and all these safety nets, they're actually a conspiracy to make you beholden to the government. They're bad. And it's like, hang on, let's just take it from your worldview. You think that the Illuminati and the elites are in total control of everything. Isn't the Occam's razor simplest explanation that rich people don't want you to like that? Because it'll cost them money and it'll upset their sort of profit margins and stuff like that. So wouldn't the simpler explanation be, rather than the double bluff from the Illuminati, that the Illuminati actually just trick you into not wanting to have a better standard of life?
It's that they're all powerful, but they have to hide their true intentions.
Oh God,
It's like, what?
Yeah, none of it makes sense when you sort of like sort of picking it too strong. Mike, I've noticed that we've had you for about an hour and 20 minutes. I did want to talk to you about.
It's been fascinating, guys.
Well, I did want to still talk to you about your book. Have you got some time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I have as much time. It's great to talk to you guys.
Oh, thank you so much.
Should I tell you a little bit about the book?
It is brilliant. So I just finished reading it today, and I really, really enjoyed it. Interesting as well. There's a lot of stuff that I was not aware of. It's fascinating. Yes, please tell us about it.
Wow. I mean, I thought that you guys knew everything about this kind of stuff. I'm glad I gave you some facts that you didn't know. Yeah. So, I mean, it's the product of, years in the past, the couple of years that I've been living here, but sort of back in the United States. I'm originally from here, but, it's called Day of Reckoning. And the title is basically not a warning. It's almost sort of like a description of the mindset of the far right at the moment. And I put it out there that, conspiracy and paranoia that comes from COVID, but even sort of further back to sort of the rise of the alt-right and then also to January 6th and what happened after that, have really kind of taken over the fringes in a way that's pretty remarkable, not unprecedented, but to a degree that we haven't seen before in the United States. And just at the time when these kinds of people, and there's a big overlap, and I don't want to paint all Trump supporters as conspiracy theorists because clearly they're not. But the sort of hardcore MAGA types have been overcome by this at the same time as they've moved into a more mainstream, positions of power. And as we sit here, obviously the polls are showing us that Donald Trump is in the driver's seat to win. And these are the kinds of people who are his most fervent supporters. So I go around the country and I sort of explain, meeting the Stu Peters of the world and, election officials in Iowa and fringe broadcasters in California who are wandering around with the alt-right and Antifa and all sorts of other wonderful, crazy characters, and try to sort of paint a picture of how they're jockeying for power and also their worldview and also the pretty intense pushback that they're getting, that I sort of start and end the book with the son of Stuart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers founder, and how he is actually, surviving and trying to sort of undo a lot of the stuff that he saw growing up in the far-right militia movement.
Yeah, I thought that part of the beginning of the book really with him in it is very, very powerful, very moving. I was like, let's get into it.
Yeah, totally.
It's really remarkable. I mean, when we talk about sort of the front line, and this is what you just can't get a sense of, online, and Dakota, he's got a social media presence. I was lucky enough to sort of, spend a week with him, and he's just, he lives in this community that was so friendly to his father and the values of his father. And he'll go down to the bar and he describes to me, hearing, people saying, hey, we should just, kill all the Democrats. When are we going to start? And he's living there partially, because he has family ties there. He's got to support his family and he doesn't have like a whole lot of money, but also because he actually truly believes that, he's holding the line. And, he is. He's right about that.
It's interesting you use the word militia, because that was what I was going to ask you. Like, do you think that there's parallels to sort of militia movements that were surrounded like people like Timothy McVeigh and stuff like that in the sort of like 90s? There seems to be almost a sort of reoccurrence of that. But what your book so brilliantly does is set out all the different groups. Your Proud Boys, your Oath Keepers, 3%ers, Patriot Front, the anti-vaxxers, people that are just connected on the sort of fringe through theories like pertaining to Alex Jones and even David Icke and stuff like that. And you show the intricacies and the differences between them all. And it's one of those things where like a lot of people would paint everybody with a broad brush and just go, they're all Nazis or whatever. Whilst there's elements of truth to that, there are certain things that would run through these groups that are similar. It is because they are so different that I think they're so effective, because like people like the Proud Boys, as you say, they would say, well, look at Enrique Tarrio. Like, we can't be racist. Yeah. It might not be Nazism, but there's a certain nationalistic fervor and a certain political fervor that runs through all of these groups. It's kind of like black metal in as much as like, to somebody like from the outside, it's just like, well, it's just a load of people screeching like idiots and guitars that sound like bees. And it's like, no, there's lots of different subgenres, and there's like symphonic black metal and depressive black metal and national socialist black metal and this sort of black metal and stuff like that. And it's far more complicated when you sort of get into it and stuff like that. And that was really fascinating, finding out the sort of the differences between these different groups.
Yeah.
And how a lot of them sometimes don't even get on.
No, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, they don't get on.
Was it the Patriot Front and the Proud Boys fighting together?
Yeah.
I'd be so pissed off if I was Patriot Front, because they're like, what's the equivalent? They're like, I don't know. They're like a sort of like,
spit it out.
Right. Remember that film Mobsters that came out with Christian Bale and stuff like that, off the back of like the success of Goodfellas and stuff like that? You're not one of us. It's like, well, we bloody are. We're doing everything the same as you. Why aren't we accepted into the canon?
Because you're feds.
Yeah, but in many ways, I feel sorry for them. They must be sat around, like, ironing their khakis, making them all nicely creased and going, I don't get it, John. We're not feds. Why does nobody like us?
Yeah, it's like the feds thing. Whenever they march, I'm just like, oh no, I'm going to have to tell a load of people, like nobody really listens, whatever.
Yeah.
That like, no, they're a real group. Guys, don't you, oh, nobody's ever unmasked them. Yeah, the mainstream media has never. How come we've never seen their pictures? Come on, Dave Nywer, like, he's like puts their pictures up. They're in the local newspaper in Idaho. You can go online. You can see their mugshots. I have, I have an alert every time Thomas Rousseau appears in a court hearing or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like they're not a secret group. Like, yeah, they may cover their faces. It's astonishing that like everybody knows that like the Nazis are the bad guys, right? And so like even Patriot Front, like they don't sort of say, hey, we're Nazis. We're just like blood and hey, go to Blood and Soil, go to our Blood and Soil website or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are like actual people who identify like that, but they're very, very small. I mean, some of them are sort of like very dangerous accelerationists. I talk a little bit about it in the book. But yeah, then you have this range. What the range does is it sort of, allows them to sort of give this idea. And, it's parallel and sometimes it is like the conspiracy world, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, we're the free thinkers. You can come to this movement and you can believe that the voting system was rigged by Chinese hackers, or you can believe that it was rigged by Democrats, non-governmental organizations, or you can believe that Joe Biden was behind it or whatever. But like, the bounds of conspiracy are like, yes, there's some sort of cheating going on, but within that, there's all this sort of like talking about it. So it gives this illusion of debate.
And also the illusion of a sort of a broader sort of a collaborative effect between all of these groups and stuff like that.
And it's participatory,
yeah.
Like QAnon and all these things. So you can sort of add your own bullshit in there.
Yeah.
And people will take it seriously and they'll like you. And then, like, crucially, you have a figurehead in Donald Trump. And you have like a movement that can sort of galvanize, like the alt-right. Like, a lot of conservatives and Republicans were like aghast in 2016 by the rise of the alt-right. But the point is, you got to elect your guy. You have a binary choice in this system. And so the differences just sort of go aside. And then, hey, let's all like go for our man. If you look at the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, for instance, the January 6th investigation came out, and, Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes, the heads of those two organizations, just like didn't like each other. They just like really, really did not like each other.
What's interesting is you see that sort of reflected as well in the sort of the media sphere as well. And then occasionally they eat each other, like at the minute with Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro and stuff like that, because essentially a lot of them are lying as well. This is what we were saying earlier, like your JD Vance and stuff like that. He doesn't believe anything that he's saying. Anything that he's saying at the minute, he realizes this is going to make him very, very wealthy. And so he's like, if you don't like his previous principles, that's fine. He's got other principles.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you can say necessarily that he doesn't believe it. I think JD Vance he's a fascinating character. He's
an opportunist.
He certainly has changed his mind a lot, right? And he certainly has, you know what I mean?
I guess that's one way of putting it.
The vice president is also like a kind of famously a not very powerful position in American politics, right?
Yeah.
And clearly he was picked for his loyalty, so is he going to stand up to Donald Trump? Like, there's no indication that he would.
No. He was also picked because, like, I forget exactly what happened with Mike Pence, but they had a falling out, didn't they? Like, there was something in their relationship where like it made it awkward. Oh, yeah, it was that was it. They tried to murder him. Oh, yes, I recall.
They were calling for his execution.
There was that. Hey, behind the scenes, they're all mate. Like, but one of the interesting things is like kind of the wackiness of these groups is in many ways the sort of like the danger of them. For example, your Proud Boys, you've got to name cereals whilst they punch you in the arms and stuff like that. And it's a drinking group. You highlight very much so in the book that like a lot of them are there for the drinking and the smoking and it's a fun group or whatever. But at the same time, they were absolutely integral in the plot to attempt to take over the country and murder several politicians. Like, they were a vital linchpin or a vital part of that process. And so it is fascinating the way that your book goes on about how these things have been normalized to the point where people are quite, and you do see this as well in the UK, particularly with sort of reform, people who have Fazil Talia Robinson, even sort of like your sort of stauncher Brexiteers and stuff like that, where essentially like these horrible, horrible ideas are becoming more and more normalized. And it's like you were saying earlier, they become tropes to the point where basically, why don't we like drag queens? It's not because we're hateful, it's because they're all paedophiles. It's like, there's no evidence of that at all. We're on C, we've gone from A to C. But it's vital that we miss the B, because otherwise this all collapses. But those sort of ideas are becoming more and more normalized and more sort of included in the political conversation, which is just a shame.
You mentioned sort of these allegations like groomers and whatnot, and they basically are just grabbing onto this because it's politically potent. So in the story, in 2019, I spent quite a lot of time with Proud Boys in the area of Portland, Oregon. And their sort of spokesperson was a transgender woman named Edie Dixon.
Yeah.
Not an official member of the group because it was for the boys. But it was remarkable. She was sort of like our entree into the world of the Proud Boys. And she's like, all right, yeah, meet us here, blah, 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 blah. And I just can't imagine that sort of acceptance, she was like not just tolerated, but like part of the gang, like an integral part of the organization. Can't imagine that Proud Boys in Portland or anywhere would sort of have that level of acceptance. So those things changed, and that basically because of the Proud Boys having to refashion themselves after January the 6th, And that's just the cause that they found. And, it became about sort of sexuality and gender primarily. It was always sort of there in their sort of traditional gender role ideology. That was from the start, but it's, it turns depending on what issues are hot at the moment.
Yeah. And I suppose it's a debate between the fact that basically, fundamentally people are people, and if you make friends with people and stuff like that, you tend to sort of overlook broader ideologies. Or the flip side of that argument is your people like your Blair Whites, your Edis, your Vivek Ramaswamis, your Myling Annapopulises and stuff like that. They're camouflage for bastards. That's what they are. Like, they're just there to sort of we couldn't possibly be horrific because look at this guy. Look at him. Hey.
Yeah, you mean like minority groups provide some sort of like, hey, we're not racist, we're not homophobes.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
But the thing about that is what feeds into the other thing that I thought was fabulous in your book was the concept of murder denial. And specifically in regards to cases like George Floyd and stuff like that, where these horrific acts have been flipped to be sort of ways that the media and the government lied to you in order to make you feel bad as a white person. And the fascinating thing that I thought with that was there was parallels to two things, right? One, in the conspiracy world, the absolute reluctance to face the reality that COVID existed or was a threat. Okay. And then in the sort of political sphere, this sort of, for want of a better phrase, this Trumpism, this sort of like, reality is almost like doublespeak. What I said yesterday might have absolutely no bearing on what I say. He's been pro-vaccine, he's been anti-vaccine, he's said numerous contradictory things on a number of topics. The J.D. Vance has said terrible things about Trump. Ted Cruz has said terrible things about Donald Trump, and he's, and vice versa. And all of a sudden their memory hold, and it's just like, no, I don't recall that. I don't remember insulting your wife. Like, it's like, well, you did. It's on film. And it is a bizarre state of affairs again that we're living in, where this acceptance of just altering things in your brain, flipping a switch in your brain, and just like lying to yourselves, or coming in sort of like a collective. It's almost like the lie is there for the greater good in the mindset of these people. Yeah, I just find that bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as extreme as some of the examples in the book, but the J.D. Vance stuff about Trump, I want to be able to ask him about what it actually is. You know what I mean? He's sort of repeatedly said, yeah, well, I just changed my mind, right? I haven't, and maybe it's out there. Maybe I just need to sort of look harder at the Ohio newspapers or something like this. But it's like, he wasn't just sort of like mildly critical, The writers here in the U.S. for the BBC, we all got assigned shortlist candidates to do a profile on each of the vice presidents in the event. And my ticket came up. I won the lottery, guys.
Oh, nice.
I got Vance. So and that was the fascinating thing about and the story that I wrote sort of laid out at the beginning. Here's all the stuff that he said about Trump before going into obviously his biography and actually his perhaps a little bit less covered and maybe even more consequential is his really different attitude towards his upbringing. As somebody who also grew up in the Rust Belt and who grew up in a working class family, certainly not as poor and broken family as J.D. Vance. I'm not going to sort of compare myself to him. The guy had a tough life to start out with, but I sort of get it. Let me put it like that. And he, in his book, seems to blame the culture of the working class, particularly the white working class in America. He does not do that anymore. He blames the elites. It's very weird because he's also been working for the elites. He's been working for Peter Thiel. He went to Yale Law School. So there's a transformation that's not really sort of been, sort of, where the hell did it come from? And what do you really believe? When we go to the darker places, which is probably more our territory these days, right? Like it's that murder denial. So you had somebody on that stage. Tucker Carlson believes that George Floyd died of a drug overdose, right? If you look at his stuff, and again, it's this sort of, he's only putting these things out on X. It's not on Fox News every night. in the same way that Donald Trump, he doesn't tweet, he puts it on Truth Social so fewer people see it, and it can be a little bit more extreme. He doesn't ask questions about George Floyd. He's just straight up like, hey, I've got some evidence, and I know that George Floyd died of a drug overdose. He wasn't choked to death. And that's crazy. And then he gets a slot at the Republican convention to speak, and quite a high-profile one.
Well, this is the thing, but this is the flipping between it. It's the equivalent of mixtape 50 Cent having a go at Fat Joe and album 50 Cent. That's the Republican National Convention. Or everybody, there's an audience for the album, but those in the know, they know the mixtape stuff. Do you know what I mean? And it's like my inability to do anything that hasn't got an analogy to sort of music or film is sorry. But but it is absolutely incredible and fascinating though.
Yeah. So getting back to what I was just saying, obviously you didn't hear Tucker Carlson say from the stage, hey, George Floyd, you might not know this, guys, but George Floyd died of a drug overdose. It wasn't that. I mean, he was saying that, God save Trump. You know what I mean? That was sort of the main theme. And that Trump was the real president, and again, sort of doing
he's
hints.
doing his whistles and whatnot.
He doesn't say it from the main stage. He doesn't need to say it from the main stage because of what we were talking about earlier. All you got to do is just hint at it, and people fill in the gaps because of what they know, and the audience there, what they know. In general, people there are actually talking a little bit less about the conspiratorial stuff because they are so confident at the moment. And, as well, perhaps they should be because of the polls and all this, the disarray in the Democrats and all that stuff is just politics. You know what I mean? So, if it was perhaps a little bit less sort of dark and conspiratorial in terms of what people were actually saying. Be very interesting to see if this disarray and the Democratic side, I'm here in Chicago. I'll be going to the Chicago convention next month, and then maybe we'll hear some really left-wing, dark, conspiratorial stuff. I wouldn't sort of doubt that would happen. Interestingly, I went to the screening of a movie that was produced by Steve Bannon. It was called Government Gangsters. Kash Patel, who was a Trump official, narrated it and sort of largely made it. And interestingly, from the British perspective, there was a Q&A, which I didn't stick around for because, why
would you?
Kash Patel comes on stage with Raheem Kassam, former Breitbart UK editor, who's been he's very sort of connected to Nigel Farage.
Absolutely,
I actually see Farage, although some of my colleagues saw Farage and Liz Truss and whatnot.
I was going to ask you that. Did you see him?
Yeah, I didn't personally see him there. Around the time of sort of the alt-right, I mean, Breitbart was a sort of nexus for the alt-right. But, Steve Bannon was talking about this. The Milo Yiannopoulos of the world were actively employed by Breitbart.
He didn't write these stories, though. He got Andrew Anglin to write all the stories. But
right. He's relying on neo-Nazis for sources. It's crazy.
And I think Andrew Arnheimer was involved with that as well, wasn't he? Weave?
Maybe? It's a little bit hazy for me now to plug my previous book.
Oh, yes.
On the alt-right. You can check that one out. If you like Day of Reckoning, check out alt-right.
Yeah,
just Google me, guys. Yeah, the sort of hashing of it was in there. And they were, again, when you talk about the memory hole, well, there's just a lot of stuff has gone on. But I do recall around the murder of Joe Cox, how Breitbart in the UK was very central in pushing a very sort of politicized, using facts, I suppose, but they were trying to sort of blame it on a
false flag, essentially.
I don't know if they went necessarily to false flag, but they were hey, look, was this a right-wing terror attack? No. There's this.
The guy was a right-wing guy who shouted Britain first as he did it, which is a right-wing slogan. And so they reasoned, along with Richard D. Hall, actually, as well, reasoned that, that's proof that he couldn't possibly be far right because of all the things that prove that he's far right. That's evidence that it's a setup.
Yeah, it's too obvious, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's too obvious. Nothing ever happens as it actually happens, does it? At the rally, were they all wearing the ear things? Because that was reported quite widely in the press.
Yeah, there was a few. We actually, there were definitely a few people there. It wasn't a mass thing that I could see. I wasn't on the floor for the last 2 nights, though. So, but it wasn't like our reporters who were on the floor. It's not like everybody was doing it, but there definitely some people were. You saw the pictures.
Yeah.
They were real. I'll say this, and this is sort of like a more general thing. At first, I was right near the Ohio delegation when J.D. Vance walked in. It was like being at a festival. Everybody was just like slammed up against the barricades, and like people were elbowing each other. And there was like this general sort of like emotion and enthusiasm for the first couple of days.
Yeah.
Then you saw the Kid Rock, the Hulk Hogan, Dana White introduces Trump.
Oh, Dana White was there as well, wasn't it? Like, thank God they're not appealing to a certain type of lowbrow misogyny. Like, because that would be dreadful, wouldn't it? Like, how close did you get to J.D. Vance?
I didn't get that close because it was like a big press of everybody. And I was about like 6 deep. You know, he delivered a speech. It was okay. It was fine. I spent a lot of time watching his speeches that he makes to rooms of a few dozen people or a few hundred people, you know, and he goes to some very sort of, it's hard to sort of characterize them. They're not like super mainstream conservative conferences, like National Conservatism Conference we spoke at like a couple weeks ago, where there will be Republican lawmakers there, and it won't be the, CPAC, the big conservative conference. It won't even be like a Turning Point USA, which has like a fringe people. They sort of fancy themselves more sort of intellectual, more Christian nationalist, more into sort of like ideas and stuff like this. I get the sense that like Vance hadn't really spoken in front of nearly that many people before.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
yeah. He was definitely a little, I mean, he made one sort of joke that didn't really land because like, there's a big sort of college football rivalry between Ohio and Michigan, and there was sort of like chants breaking out whenever he like mentioned Ohio and stuff. And then he made a joke, like he said something like, "There's been too much political violence already. Let's chill it out, Ohio and Michigan." I was like, "Okay, was that that was a joke about an assassination attempt?"
Yeah. Yes. This is like. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you know, I don't like go around policing people's speech or whatever, but it didn't really land.
Nah.
This is also the guy who who was the biggest Republican to immediately come out after the assassination and say it's because of Democrat campaign rhetoric that this happened. You know, it's kind of a problem for anybody who's sort of into this kind of thing. I don't really go into the book to this, but like there's this idea of stochastic terrorism where you say stuff and then people act on it and whatnot. And there's been a number of, you know, right-wing terror attacks, shootings in this country, elsewhere. And so if you're going to link up rhetoric, you know, like it's very, having looked at a little bit at the research, I think it is pretty tenuous. You know, it's kind of contradictory about the exact interplay between words and violence, right? You know, and it's very situational, and it's like we could talk another like 3 hours.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, it doesn't necessarily
alone
have to be violence. It just has to be action. I mean, like, you know, I personally know people that nearly died because they listened to David Icke, who said that COVID isn't real and the vaccines will kill you.
Right.
Like,
yes.
So, you know,
yeah.
that is just as impactful. That's stochastic terrorism. Like that is what that is. It's a degree of irresponsibility that is just that can cause harm to people, essentially. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm a little bit, I suppose, hazy on, you know, what exactly stochastic terrorism is. Again, which is why I don't like sort of go into it like hugely in the book or whatever. But if you accept that argument, like, you know, for the sake of argument, if you accept that argument that words can cause this kind of stuff, like clearly you have a problem. Because you have a candidate who says what he said, you know what I mean? He has years and years of saying this very inflammatory stuff. So it's like, because we have 3.5 months of this left, the gloves are going to come off sometime, probably like today, you know what I mean? Like right now, as we speak, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are having a rally in Michigan. I don't know what they're going to say. I'm going to avidly look at it later. But if not today, then next week or next month, there's going to be inflammatory rhetoric. And is that going to cause some violence? who knows? But if you are looking at that from that perspective, it's an issue. It's a problem. And we are set for a massive debate here in the US about that particular issue.
Yeah. What do you think about the sort of impact of people like David Icke and Alex Jones on issues like this?
That's a good question. I feel like there's a real distinction between, say, Alex Jones and his influence here in the US. And I know that David Icke has tons of people who follow him and listen to him in the UK. But Alex Jones spoke at the Turning Point USA conference in Detroit last month. You know, Alex Jones is increasingly becoming, bizarrely, even as his financial situation has deteriorated like massively.
Yeah.
And anytime he's in the news these days, it's not for sort of spreading conspiracy theories. It's for, having to pay $1 billion. And that's an interesting thing. It's like, I don't necessarily see a mass audience for this because it's not anything that's going to draw people to your side. You know what I mean? The sort of, like your average person on the street who's not paying attention to politics all the time.
But people that aren't necessarily interested in politics, yeah.
Yeah. Like if you say Alex Jones, they're probably going to think, yeah, that guy, that Sandy, gross. You know what I mean? So there's no benefit that I see of accepting Alex Jones into your big tent if you're on the right or in the Republican Party. And yet it's happening. It's pretty bizarre to me. And in some ways, it's sort of this, I suppose, like focus on free speech. And of course, he's free to say whatever he wants, but then also if he defames people, then he has to pay $1 billion.
Yeah. See, my take on it isn't that it's like, it's to draw the Republicans or swing voters or stuff like that will go, oh, Alex Jones. Oh, right now I'm on board. Like it's Alex Jones fans that have traditionally been apolitical. It's tapping, like QAnon, it's tapping that demographic of people that don't vote or wouldn't vote. And that's the use of this aspect of it.
Yeah. Or just the sort of energy that he brings, just the sort of, these people are just going to tweet like mad and put up YouTube videos like crazy.
And also the sort of like the connection to Elon Musk and sort of like, that type of, again, it's networking, but it's networking in a sort of, in a different sort of genre to where you normally would, basically.
And I know like some listeners might think that sounds a little bit conspiratorial, but it happens like all the time though. Like let's just go back to how Dominic Cummings convinced a bunch of apolitical people to vote for Brexit.
Yeah.
It's all laid out exactly how he did it. And he went for those people that tended not to vote. Because the best thing it seems to be is either try to win over the moderates or try and convince the people who normally don't vote to vote. And the conspiracy crowd was definitely that apolitical group back then that did not bother voting.
Because there's no point to it.
Yeah, but he's by Trump going on to Alex Jones back in 2015, 16.
Yeah,
that was him right there declaring like, I will speak for you truthers. And that was Alex Jones going, he is going to speak for us finally. He's going to bring down the New World Order. He's going to bring down the deep state.
All he did was what Russell Brand did. He noticed like, shit, I've knackered this. Or it wasn't even that he's knackered, but Russell Brand is like, I'm persona non grata in this particular sphere for reasons. But if I say X, Y, and Z, then there's this entire group who will suddenly basically like treat me like I've been your best friend forever. And it's the same with the InfoWars crowd. To a lesser extent, your David Icke crowd. David Icke was very instrumental in like subtly getting he never told people to vote for Boris and he never told people to vote for Brexit, but he did make it clear that if you voted for somebody other than that particular candidate, then Brexit wouldn't happen. And that was a bad thing because the EU is the first step to the New World Order. So, and again, up until that point, the mindset within the conspiratorial sort of landscape was, we don't vote because we don't involve ourselves in these things because it's all selections. There's no elections. It's all fake.
Yeah.
It's all for show. And then you can mechanize and mobilize, a huge swathe of people, a surprisingly large amount of people. And in some places, that's enough.
By all accounts, obviously it'll be the US election will be decided by a handful of people in a handful of states. You know what I mean? We're talking about a few thousand people. So it's like, it doesn't actually take much. Yeah, I mean, so this is I suppose the question of that, I get all the time is, from editors and from people outside the world of journalism is like, does any of this stuff really matter? Well, yeah, I mean, it matters at the fringes, but the fringes might be enough. You know what I mean? Like a couple thousand votes in Wisconsin could easily be the difference. It's also very interesting, sort of the Alex Jones. I mean, if you go back more than 15 years, Alex Jones was not particularly sort of associated with the right wing. You know what I mean?
He was associated with the militia groups, but yeah, he made he made a point of saying that he was apolitical, and he was also very anti-Bush, who was in for a long time.
Right.
And so he gave the impression that he was not right wing, basically.
Yeah. Sort of, friendly to sort of, I guess, left libertarians.
Yeah.
Even anarchists and just.
Well, he was very anti-police
sort of
state, and he was very sort of like. Well, he used to think that toll booths were a symptom of the coming police state.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I recount a conversation I had with his ex-wife, Kelly Jones. Yeah. I don't know if she's been on your podcast before.
No, but we'd love to speak to her. That would be fascinating.
Oh, she would be great. You definitely should get her on. It was such a bizarre conversation in the house that they used to share with all these massive plaster circus animals dotted around for the kids, and and below us thousands of those military
the prepper
MREs
packs and stuff. Yeah,
the prepper packs. Yeah. So when you get back when you talk about sort of like, does he actually believe it? And Kelly was like, yeah, he believes it. Here's all the shit we got in our basement that I can't get rid of.
He's a John Bircher. Like, he believes aspects of it, but he also understands the game. Like, and he'll flip his beliefs like all the time. But he came from a John Birch background. Like, None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen, which is what this podcast is named after. It was the text that basically informed his worldview. His dad was into John Birch and stuff like that, and various other people connected to him. I think his uncle, and he speaks about this occasionally on the show and stuff like that. But yeah. So and interestingly, if you even go back and look at it, like where he sort of flipped and started to sort of get very, very sort of like into this whole thing was to try and essentially protect Timothy McVeigh, because he was tangentially connected to the militia movement. And obviously, basically, Timothy McVeigh was involved in militias and stuff like that, heavily influenced by the Turner Diaries. Do you know what I found out, which is horrific about Timothy McVeigh? Has everyone seen the film Clerks? The Kevin Smith film
Clerks.
You know the famous conversation, right? You know the famous conversation that they have about the Death Star and about the rebels killed all these independent contractors, and they have a discussion as to whether that's fine or not. Yep. Timothy McVeigh used that same analogy to justify killing children. He said anybody that worked on the Death Star, it would be part of the Empire, fair game. Anyone that lives in the work that is in the building is connected to the FBI, fair game.
Gosh, going back to Alex Jones, I looked into these ideas, like, that sort of false flag idea, false flags and crisis actors. Obviously, those ideas were around, and the false flag thing is, ancient, you know what I mean, comes back. But the very specific meaning of those things these days and the way that they come up, with mass shootings and now assassination attempts or whatever, it all stems from Sandy Hook and Alex Jones, That's the popular version of it these days.
Yeah. But you did actually meet with Wolfgang Halbig, didn't you?
Yeah. A great get. I rely on a lot of awesome producers and directors at the BBC. My colleague Sam Judah managed to nail down Halbig for an interview. I think, again, we were probably advantaged by the fact that, hey, we're coming from Britain. You act a little naive. We just want to hear your story. And at great length in his suburban Orlando home, he told us all about how there was 500 people involved and whatnot. Absolutely crazy. But that's sort of how recycled his sort of stories recycled onto InfoWars. Really sort of
the fascinating quote that he gave you was, "If I'm wrong about this, I need to be put in an institution." Or it's something along those lines. It is strange. Strange, yeah. But yeah, fascinating still, though.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna have to wrap this up because we're getting into 2 hours here, Mike.
Sorry, Mike, we've cut you for far too long.
It's been fascinating. Yeah, no, it's great to talk to you guys. Obviously, it's wonderful. Hopefully we covered as much ground as you needed and wanted in this crazy week of politics, particularly here in the US.
Well, I think maybe you might have to come back in a month when you've done the DNC.
That would be fabulous.
You know what? I would love to. Anytime. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, let's do this. Definitely. Because there's so much more that we need to speak to you about anyways. So let's do it again.
Yeah. No, it's always great talking to you guys.
And also genuinely loved the book. Absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. Really, really enjoyed it. And can't recommend it highly enough. So, and I'm going to search out your alt-right book now.
And you can get both of them on Pluto Press.
That's right. Any good bookstore, it comes out by Pluto Press. Easy to find online.
If you're listening to this on the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy website, just scroll down to the bottom and you will see all of Mike's contacts and you will see 2 links of where to buy both of these books.
It's called Day of Reckoning.